mysterious lights out of the darkness of the unknown, or at least so they seem to us. The UFOs, the flying saucers. As real as they may appear at the time, they are nevertheless intangible illusions between fantasy and reality. Most scientists, however, remain skeptical. They speak mostly of unexplained phenomena, of optical illusions, or refer to the secret research carried out during the period of the Third Reich. A documentary of mystical stories. What's more, these phenomena are even mentioned in the German Armed Forces technical manuals. As a matter of fact, the world's first reported UFO sighting seemed to confirm this theory. On the 14th of December, 1944, Reuters reported in the New York Times, "A mysterious illuminated ball is the latest Nazi air warfare weapon. This means that towards the end of the Second World War, Germany was in possession of a secret weapon which displayed all the typical characteristics of a UFO." Our quest for German UFOs has been extremely difficult. We gathered together mysterious reports and stories, underground literature, photographs, sketches, and fragments of handwriting, and we tried to make contact with individuals who had been involved with the former secret societies Thule and Friel, as well as the Black Sun organization. One person we encountered would only say, "Those who know do not speak. Those who speak do not know." The first part of our puzzle took us to pre-First World War Vienna, where all sorts of esoteric, occult, and Sumerian ideas and material were circulating. Ideas which would later be taken up by the Third Reich, and with them the vision of a new and unconventional technology. It was a period which witnessed an enormous blossoming of various secret doctrines and orders: Templars and Rosicrucians, Illuminati and Freemasons, Anthroposophists, Theosophists, Neo-Templars and Armanen. Some of them seemed suddenly to have woken up after a centuries-long sleep. What had disturbed their slumber was this: the impending arrival of the prophesied New Age, the changeover from the age of Pisces to the Aquarian Age. Every one of these groups felt themselves called upon to make their mark on the approaching era. At the beginning, heretical theologians as well as Oriental, Nordic, and Atlantis scholars all worked in concert, fascinated by one goal: the new golden age. Transcending good and evil. From the beginning of time, this concept has triggered a conflict in the spiritual world, between light and darkness, between white and black magic, between occultism and wisdom. Our Earth and its spiritual dimensions, which are the thoughts of humanity, are the mirror of these conflicts. Each time every human being makes a decision, he is faced anew with the choice between two paths: the white road of unselfish love, or the black road of selfishness, which ineluctably leads to doctrine. Every individual who comes into contact with higher learning considers himself basically good. And yet, the two principles are still within him, obligating him to examine which thoughts and deeds he will use to serve which power. At the end of time, the twilight of the gods, he will realize that heaven and hell are our own thoughts and actions, good impending arrival of the prophesied New Age, the changeover from the age of Pisces to the Aquarian Age. Every one of these groups felt themselves called upon to make their mark on the approaching era. At the beginning, heretical theologians as well as Oriental, Nordic, and Atlantis scholars all worked in concert, fascinated by one goal: the new golden age. Transcending good and evil. From the beginning of time, this concept has triggered a conflict in the spiritual world, between light and darkness, between white and black magic, between occultism and wisdom. Our Earth and its spiritual dimensions, which are the thoughts of humanity, are the mirror of these conflicts. Each time every human being makes a decision, he is faced anew with the choice between two paths: the white road of unselfish love, or the black road of selfishness, which ineluctably leads to doctrine. Every individual who comes into contact with higher learning considers himself basically good. And yet, the two principles are still within him, obligating him to examine which thoughts and deeds he will use to serve which power. At the end of time, the twilight of the gods, he will realize that heaven and hell are our own thoughts and actions, good and evil our own invention. Then he can draw on this experience to make the journey home to completeness. The powers of darkness and light serve only one Lord, the creator of all things. They have the one goal of availing ourselves of the life experience to create a race of superior beings. Power without love can only lead to catastrophe. Back then, a young man came into contact with all these secret teachings in Vienna: Adolf Hitler. He read all the books and other literature he could find on these subjects. Hitler soon evolved a vision whereby he realized the world would have to be reforged to pave the way for a new age. The way was now marked out for the steps he would take. The sole power that seeks renewal and yet creates destruction. By the same token, this period would also see the development of positive knowledge, which would lead to the creation of a comprehensive technology. And once again, our search for clues in our quest for the alternative technology, supposedly responsible for the German UFOs, which would appear later, led us back to Vienna, to the year 1917. 4 men and a woman met here in the Viennese cafe Schopenhauer. The young Maria Ortiz, a spiritualistic medium from Zagreb, the student and fighter pilot Lothar Weitz, the occultist, orientalist, and officer Karl Haushofer, Rudolf von Sebottendorf, an occultist who had recently returned from the Orient, as well as Prelate Gernot from the Order of Knights Templar. Their subject was the coming of the New Age. They spoke of secret revelations, the Spear of Destiny, the magical violet black stone. They discussed the possibility of making transmedial contact with the ancient Germanic and Babylonian deities, Ishtar, Ostara, and Isais, and of communicating with distant worlds, not only on this side, but also on the other. It is quite likely that this coffeehouse meeting witnessed the birth of the secret Thule Society, which in turn later spawned the German National Socialist Party, the SS, Black Sun, and the Friel Society, which in its turn gave a foundation to the occult activities of the Third Reich and the new comprehensive technology, and the beginning of German UFOs. What was the secret behind it all? The invincible source of power for them was the Black Sun, an infinite beam of light which, although invisible to the human eye, was nevertheless there and very real. Just as the bright daylight sun can illuminate the exterior, so the dark sun can light up the soul of man. It illuminates the divine light. To this very day, the occult philosophy of the Third Reich is veiled under a thick cloud of mystery and secrecy. Its leaders were drawn from the ranks of the Thule Society and the SS. In many ways, their ideas differed significantly from the accepted National Socialist Party line. Their emblem was the black sun. A secret philosophy thousands of years old provided the foundation on which the occult practitioners of the Third Reich would later build. The black sun symbol can be found in many Babylonian and Assyrian places of worship. Even the Phoenicians and the Carthaginians knew of the symbol and the beliefs that it represented. The Babylonian and Assyrian civilizations often depicted the black sun, the Godhead's inner light, in the form of a cross. Assyrian kings wore an insignia which in no way differed from the one more commonly known as the German Knight's Cross. This means the origin of this cross is many thousands of years older than Christianity. We have no way of knowing just what exactly was going on in the minds of the occultists of the Third Reich, and to what mysterious ends their ideas would lead them. Perhaps they believed in the ancient prophecy of the New Babylon, which would rise again in some unspecified centrally located country when the third Sargon would return. The secret knowledge and the prophecies which the Knights Templar had brought back with them from the Orient had been slumbering for centuries, waiting for the time of fulfillment to approach. In 1919, von Sebottendorf joined with Karl Haushofer and Dietrich Eckart to form the Thule Society. This was to be a melting pot of various occult orders, with a network of connections throughout Germany. The center was to be in Munich. Many members of the Thule Society formed themselves in active opposition to the short-lived Socialist Republic of Bavaria. A political party was founded, and in 1921, Adolf Hitler, a man well known for his occult beliefs, was engaged as a political orator. Inspired by members of the Thule Society, Hitler's plan for a 1,000-year Reich was born. The increasing political ambitions of the Thule Society resulted in a number of smaller groups going their own way. One of these groups was the Vril Society. Towards the end of 1919, a select group of people, members of both the Thule and Vril societies, met in an old hunting lodge near Berchtesgaden. Taking a prominent part in the proceedings for the first time was Dr. H.O. Schumann, a man whose area of expertise would today be called alternative energy. Nevertheless, the leading figure was the medium, Maria Ortisch. A second medium was also present on this occasion, the 18-year-old Sigrun. Maria Ortisch presented texts she had received from her spirit medium, one in the Sumerian alphabet and the other in the secret code of the Knights Templar. Both texts had already been translated. Were they messages from the gods, or tidings from some alien civilization? Construction plans for the development of some new advanced technology which would enable mankind to reach for the stars? From now on, the members of the Vril Society devoted themselves wholeheartedly to the realization of what must be one of the most bizarre ideas that ever occurred to the mind of man. The construction of a time machine that would transport them to the realms of the beyond and bring them face to face with the gods themselves. We don't know just exactly how far they got with their machine. The experiments carried out lasted almost 2 years. What we can say for certain is that the machine was the inspiration behind the Vril levitation power unit. At the beginning of 1924, the machine was dismantled and taken to Augsburg in southern Germany for storage, perhaps to the Messerschmitt aircraft factory. As a member of the Thule Society, Rudolf Hess gave a number of lectures and was, among others, one of the people responsible for the early encouragement this new technology was accorded. In all things, we are able to recognize two principles which decide upon matter and events: light and darkness, good and evil, creation and destruction. These two principles, the creative and the destructive, determine our technical means. Another advocate of this new technology was Victor Schauberger. Your propulsion theory is a mistake. This statement was made by inventor Victor Schauberger, who was believed to be associated with these esoteric societies. It addresses one of the essential points of the issue. Nowadays, we would call this the search for an alternative form of energy. Back then, however, there was much more at stake, namely the quest for another science, a radically different technology. To put it simply, we could say implosion instead of explosion. The positive elements among the esoteric scholars of the Third Reich were aware that all divine creations have always been creative, never destructive. A technology which results in explosions and is based on the principle of destruction cannot therefore really be in keeping with divine intentions. All internal combustion engines, for example, whether piston engines or rocket propulsion systems, work on the principle of an explosion. In other words, with destructive capabilities. Their ultimate effect is sure to be destructive. The environmental damage meanwhile visited on the planet by the technology of explosion, including atomic energy, exhaust fumes, and so on, makes it quite clear that the call for a new technology, like the one under discussion back then, is clearly justified. Victor Schauberger's experimental flying prototypes worked on the principle of levitation. Esoteric knowledge played an ever-increasing role in the search for new sources of energy and motive power. Such research as there was particularly important in the development of electrogravitational and tachometric propulsion. This seemed to be at the very core of the alternative technology. The energy source of the future, cheap, clean, and independent of raw materials. Two special departments, U-13 and SSE-4, were set up to concentrate exclusively on the realization of this new technology.
Die Intuition Johannes Keplers führte ihn zu den Geheimnissen der Pythagoreer.
Johannes Kepler introduced him to the secrets of Pythagoras. Victor Schauberger's vibratory theories tied in with the traditional teachings of Pythagoras and Johannes Kepler. The monochord, an acoustic measuring instrument used by Pythagoras, demonstrates to us how the universe was created using sounds, which we obtain through a division of the sides. The entire universe was created using this principle of harmonic resonance.
Ist der ganze Kosmos aufgebaut. Ganzzahlige Verhältnisse, Proportionen,
integral numbers in proportional relationship to one another determine the structure of matter.
In den Atomen. Das chemische Periodensystem.
This holds good for the universe, as well as the atom, the periodic law of elements in chemistry, the Mendelian laws of heredity, the laws of leaf arrangement in botany, as well as the formation of crystals. The list goes on.
Kommen wir auf das Grundprinzip des Monochords.
Wherever we have mathematical structures and proportions, we encounter the basic principle of the monochord, harmonic proportions.
Seine integrale Technik und seine Lehre.
Victor Schauberger used the mathematics of the monochord in order to develop and build upon his integral skills and his knowledge of the inner universe and its vibrations. One more thing, his mathematics were not Euclidean. The secret teachings of Pythagoras were taken up by the Templar order, guarded and passed on. Victor Schauberger made use of this knowledge to develop his theories, and in so doing discovered implosion. In keeping with the laws of nature, we can see here alpha and omega, the keynote to the overtone going on further to the last tone and ending in the creation of the entire universe. Symbolically, alpha and omega represent spirit and matter. Therefore, what we have here is something whole. This knowledge, therefore, makes an all-embracing science possible. Implosion is the utilization of the potential of the inner universe within the outer universe.
Ist die Nutzbarmachung des
Due to the force of
Potenzials
energy and evolutionary science, we have been able to make great strides in the field of antimatter, and with it, do away with the effects of gravity.
Technik gelangen wir in den Bereich der Antimaterie und damit zur Aufhebung der Schwerkraft.
Im Juni 1934 wurde mein Vater von Reichskanzler Adolf Hitler
In June 1934, my father was invited by the Reichschancellor Adolf Hitler to discuss his work. Hitler wanted to know about his discoveries and talk about the various possibilities and what his great plan was. And he said, yes, I'm looking for a new technology which must once again harmonize with the natural order of things. And that is my real program.
mein Programm. Kurz vor dem Eintreffen der beiden Reichsbeauftragten
Shortly before the meeting, Hitler, as Reichschancellor, gave the two deputies his orders. The two had come to discuss Hermann Göring's plan.
zwei Reichsbeauftragten von Hermann Göring Plan. Herr Viktor Schauberger, Sie werden das.
And he said, Herr Viktor Schauberger, you will speak with the two Reichs deputies, and tomorrow, or by the latest the day after tomorrow, a second meeting will take place. And he said to the two deputies, I find the plan fascinating. Yes, we Germans will bring about a whole new science.
Wir Deutschen werden eine Biotechnik in Szene bringen.
After the National Socialist Party came to power, the occult societies withdrew into the background. Within the SS, the Thule Society created a separate secret organization called the Black Sun. The Friel Society carried on much as before with its scientific research. According to reports, the Friel Society had by the middle of 1934 created its first experimental circular aircraft to be propelled with the anti-gravitational effect, the RFC-1. The men responsible for the design and construction were Dr. Schumann and an engineer from Bochum. Since 1929, the young Gertie Vogt had been responsible for running the Friel Society, and she made herself known to private investors who were prepared to invest in projects that carried an element of risk. In the meantime, the members had become convinced that the mediumistic messages originated not from gods, but in fact from a highly developed alien civilization within the Aldebaran solar system. The main star in the constellation of Taurus is Aldebaran. Could it be that the Sumerians, whose language remains a mystery to this day, were Aldebaranians? If they did perhaps once land in Mesopotamia, it is interesting that the inscriptions on the royal tablets tell us, when the royal power came down to us from the heavens. The Friel and Thule societies were not alone in their vision of space travel in the Germany of those days. UFA, the German national film company, released a motion picture called The First Woman on the Moon. The first space rocket was then built by Werner von Braun and Hermann Obert with UFA movie money. Many German scientists studied the possibility of traveling to the stars. Before the end of 1934, the Friel Society had built its first light aircraft, the RFC-2 round aircraft. It was fitted with an improved Friel propulsion system and, for the first time, magnetic impulse steering. It measured hardly more than 16 feet from end to end, but it worked. It already possessed two typical characteristics of UFOs: the optical blurring of the contours when accelerating, and the colored lights depending on the level of power applied: red, orange, yellow, green, white, blue, or violet. Despite its advanced flying capabilities, the RFC-2 remained virtually unnoticed by the political leadership of the time. The same fate was to befall the first jet-propelled aircraft 4 years later, the HE-138, the HE-176, and the HE-280. Only the SS showed a slight interest in the work of the Vril Society. Its own Black Sun formation had meanwhile set up Research Department 4, SSE-4 for short, which was responsible for coming up with alternative sources of energy. What is certain is that their aim was to make Germany independent of foreign crude oil imports. Nevertheless, stimulated by Victor Schauberger and the success of the latest real success, SSE-4 now began to construct its own light aircraft. Using Captain Hans Kohler's tachyometer converter as a basis, and appropriating many Vril components, they developed their own Thule aero engine. Towards the end of 1938, they had constructed a small propeller-driven light aircraft, the RFC-4, with the express purpose of observing how disc-shaped objects behave in flight. By 1939, the SS had already built its RFC-5, the first long-distance aircraft measuring more than 65 feet, and with the mysterious name Haunebu-1. Under tight security, the Haunebu-1 made its maiden flight, in all probability, in August of 1939. Documents show that by 1941, the British had already found out about these top-secret SS experiments. In contrast to the simple Vril prototype, the Haunebu was a complicated proposition. However, because of the form of its power unit, it offered considerably more storage space. In 1939, Hitler made one of his biggest mistakes. What might have been meant to be a limited military action, the Polish campaign, led directly to the Second World War. Quite contrary to what we might imagine the situation to be in a perfectly organized National Socialist state, everyone did exactly as he pleased. The Air Force, the Army, the Navy, and the industrial concerns all followed their own inclinations. Competition for armaments contracts became intense. As a result, alternative methods of propulsion found themselves in direct competition with their more conventional counterparts. A sort of compromise was achieved with experimental flying saucers like the RFC-7.
The 26th Fighter Squadron had been ordered to fly from Kiel to Norway in order to resupply the 30th Fighter Squadron with the Bambach command. On the return flight to Hamburg, I took a model of my aircraft design with me, and taking advantage of the opportunity, actually had it forwarded to Ernst Udet in the Reich's Air Ministry in Berlin.
Zum Abschicken zum Reichsluftfahrtministerium nach Berlin an Udet. Udet hat dieses Modell weitergegeben.
Udet passed this model on to the research establishment in Peenemünde, where tests were later carried out. Over and over again, I later heard reports from people who were working in Prague on the construction of flying discs, and progress in this field was actually being made. I also knew that Habermohl and Schriever were in possession of my model and had begun work on its practical applications.
Habermohl und Schriever mein Modell praktisch bekommen hätten zum Ausarbeiten, zum Rekonstruieren. Und diese Flugscheibe hat der Schriever auf seine Art, seine Gedanken umgebaut. Während ich
Schriever made certain alterations to my plans, whereas, as I was later to ascertain, Habermohl had remained true to my original design. The second prototype was a flying disc, 42 meters long, and was built by Miete Beluzzo in Breslau.
40 Meter große Flugscheibe wurde gebaut durch Miete und Beluzzo, und zwar in Breslau. Und diese Flugscheibe sollte dann, wie ich dann erfahren habe, sollte dann nach Spitzbergen geflogen werden.
This flying disc, as I discovered, was flown to Spitzbergen in Norway and should have returned to Rechlin on a directional beam with an unknown transmission frequency and code word.
Für den Sender nicht, was überhaupt gar nicht benutzt wurde von anderen, sollte ab diesem Richtstrahl die Flugscheibe...
However, due to a bad landing in Spitzbergen, it was damaged and was unable to complete the return flight home.
Die ist heftig abgestoßen und konnte dann nicht mehr zurückfliegen. Dann bin ich rausgefahren...
After that, I drove into the hills just outside Prague, where the secret testing ground was supposed to have been located. I had my Leica A camera with me when suddenly I saw such a flying saucer. I was wounded at the time, so I know that it was November, December, although the test flight was not due to take place until the following February. Someone had made an unscheduled test flight, and this is what I saw coming towards me. It had no wings, absolutely none. I took a photo and wound on the film, but it was already directly over me. Then I took a second photo, and I could see that it was a flying gyroscope, a flying saucer.
Eine Flugscheibe.
Apart from the conventionally powered flying saucers to be seen at this time, there were indeed other UFOs cruising the skies. A small Vril RFC-2 had been in service as a reconnaissance aircraft since the end of 1940. This rare photograph shows an RFC-2 in the skies over the southern Atlantic, on the way to a rendezvous with the auxiliary cruiser Atlantis in the waters of the Antarctic. Individual sightings of the first RFC-6 Haunebu-2 were also reported. In July 1941, work began on this Schriever-Habermohl flying gyroscope, a jet-propelled vertical takeoff light aircraft. By the end of 1942, the first practical tests could begin. However, there were serious design faults in the first prototype. The same year, Dr. Richard Miete began work on a turbine-driven light aircraft, the RFC-7T. This was to be discus and not saucer-shaped. The Italian scientist Giuseppe Belluzzo soon joined this project, followed shortly afterwards by Schriever and Habermohl. They worked together to produce a functional, reliable light aircraft. And so, on the 17th of April, 1945, Richard Miete was able to report to Adolf Hitler, "Today, under my direction, and in the presence of 3 Luftwaffe officers, the V-7 was tested in the skies above the Baltic. The general characteristics and attainable performance of the aircraft were as follows. The V-7 was a supersonic helicopter fitted with 12 BMW 028 turbo aggregate engines. During the first test flight, it reached an altitude of 78,000 feet, and on the second, rose to 80,000 feet. The craft can in principle be powered by unconventional energy sources."
My background includes remote sensing technology and the exploration of the UFO phenomena. Over the years, I've had the privilege of being a friend and colleague of the late American Naval Admiral Dolfarny, who was instrumental in bringing many of the German scientists to the United States at the end of World War II. As many of you know, there was an executive order given by President Truman in August of 1945, August 15th, 45. And in March of 1946, the States Naval War Committee authorized the collection of German materials relating to experiments of high technology. The operation known as Paperclip was to bring sequestered German scientists privately to the United States in the hope that the Americans could begin a quick start, a catch-up in the areas of V1 and V2 testing. Clearly, the Germans were involved with the building of what many allies considered miracle weapon systems. And so I have had the opportunity of looking very carefully at the documents that detail 2 histories. One, the building of the first space city on planet Earth known as Peenemünde, and the bringing over of some of the best technical and scientific experts in the world, headed by Dr. Wernher von Braun, which led to the placing of man on the moon. And secondly, a closer look at the lesser-known development of what some experts will call the Feuerkugel, the fiery ball, or the disc-like hovercraft that the Germans were experimenting with during World War II, which was known to American intelligence and yet not really appreciated until the Germans began to cooperate with the Americans following World War II in a unified effort to advance mankind into space.
The Allies described the various German flashing flying aircraft that they saw as Foo Fighters, fireballs. The German name for the typical Foo Fighter, however, was Fliegende Schildkröte, flying tortoise, because of its resemblance to the tortoise shell on the ground. It had been developed by a specialist technical unit of the SS in the Vienna suburb of Wiener Neustadt. It was, in fact, an unmanned flying probe. Its mission was to fly close to enemy aircraft and wreak havoc on the electrical circuits. In addition, it was equipped with a special type of klystron tube. The SS spoke of death rays.
I was a fighter pilot in World War II. I served a career of 24 years as a fighter pilot in the United States Air Force. But I was a young fighter pilot in World War II, and I was a captain in the Air Force near the end of the war. And we began receiving reports sometime in 1943 of Foo Fighters, fireball fighters. They were balls of brilliant light, sometimes brilliant green and sometimes brilliant orange light, sometimes the size of a basketball and sometimes much bigger, that would get in formation with our bombers and stay there. Nothing, you couldn't shoot them down. You couldn't, no matter what maneuver we went through, they stayed exactly in position. I had friends who reported these balls of fire appearing outside of the cockpit of a fighter aircraft, only 10 and 15 feet away, and they did every maneuver they could think of, dives and rolls and everything, trying to get rid of this ball of fire out there, and it remained in exactly the same position no matter what they did. This represented a technology far superior to anything that we had encountered anywhere on the planet before. We thought these objects were being manufactured by the German government because they were our opposition at the time, and we thought they had discovered some new technique because we had already experienced other instruments, other vehicles that passed through the bomber formations at very high speed that also had glowing tails. We had close approaches of disc-shaped craft, not as close as one would like, but following bomber formations. We knew that the rockets had been perfected, and we thought that most of these were simply a further extension of this rocket technology, and we believed that they were all being produced someplace by the Germans.
Now let's return to those people who right from the start were responsible for this. In the winter of 1942, a new light aircraft circled the Friel testing ground, the Friel 1. A single-seater with an overall length of 36 feet. In other words, the dimensions of a fighter aircraft, which was what the Friel was intended to be. This also holds true for the armaments. 3 30mm caliber Mk108s and 2 MG17s. While the Friel 1 was being developed and constructed, significant strides must have been made in the attempts to make transmedial contact. There were definite plans already at hand for the construction of a much larger aircraft, the Friel 7. In comparison to Friel technology, the Mita Beluzzo and Schreiber Habermold projects were really still quite conventional.
So hybrid use of this technology, some investigators believe, led to the development of the commonly recognized spacecraft known as the Balanzo, Schreiber, the Methe systems. The first, the second, and the third prototypes of which we see here represent the most commonly seen and observed spacecraft worldwide since 1947. The documentation and personal experiences with many of the German fuel experts, however, suggest that as early as 1935, the Germans were aware that there was life and technology in the universe, and were at least indirectly aware of the possibilities of building their own saucer craft, which would make them basically the first to have opened the window to contact with other areas of higher evolutionary intelligence.
Strange tracks in the perpetual ice. They compel us to take notice of an episode in history that crops up over and over again in connection with German UFOs. The German Antarctic expedition of 1938. In that year, under the personal command of Hermann Göring, an unusual expedition was planned. The operation involving the seaplane carrier Schwabenland had been given the mission of conquering land in the Antarctic. The expedition was a success, resulting in an area of 229,000 square miles being claimed for Germany as Neuschwabenland, or New Swabia. New Swabia is not just an ordinary tract of the Antarctic. It is a land with ice-free mountains and lakes, a habitable land, which had never before been visited by any foreign expedition. Whole fleets of submarines are thought to have been ordered to New Swabia shortly before the end of the war, among them the advanced types 21 and 23. And as we can see, these photographs ask more questions than they answer. Could it be that during or shortly before the end of the war, Haunebu and Friel flying saucers were transported to secret submarine locations? Towards the end of 1942, the Department SSE-4 allegedly began work on a new improved version of the Haunebu UFO, the Haunebu 2. This drawing shows the basic layout, including the power plant and fuselage. The exterior shape could vary. The dimensions of the Haunebu 2 varied from craft to craft, from an overall length of between 85 and 100 feet, and a height of between 30 and 36 feet at the center. It was said to be capable of a top speed within the Earth's atmosphere of 3,200 knots. The Haunebu 2 was also, in all probability, capable of space travel. Some versions of the Haunebu 2 already show signs of their combat readiness with the Donar ray gun, which at that time was still in the design stage. This drawing shows the layout of the crew cabin, enough room for a very, very long journey. How far were they meant to travel?
Unbeknownst to those involved in Operation Paperclip, there were other scientists involved in the development of very advanced systems, from the larger Honey-Buell systems that were developed in 1939, 42, and 45 that could carry literally scores of officers, to the Friel system, which was a very small vehicle, to a very large interplanetary electromagnetic spacecraft that was at least on the drawing boards, that had cabins for sleeping. We have the prospect of a vast system that made use of underground facilities for the preparation and launching of these most unique saucer craft that literally baffled the Americans and the British.
The SS, however, had a more audacious plan. There were, at least on paper, plans for a giant Haunebu spaceship with a diameter of over 400 feet. And if the reports are correct, There was even a 230-foot-long Haunebu 3. Just before the end of the Second World War, Department SSE-4 planned to build its own gigantic UFO space station. It was to have been assembled in the old Zeppelin hangars. Its name? The Andromeda Machine. Weights of more than 100 metric tons wouldn't have posed any difficulty to the real gravitational engine.
Where did the inspiration come? We look back at the history of the ancient Near East, keeping in mind that the German philosophers were some of the best Orientalists. The work of Friedrich Delitzsch, who was one of the foremost Assyriologists. In his book, Bibel und Babel, the study of Babylon and the Bible, we acknowledge a reference to flying spacecraft. We have the same concepts in the Sanskrit traditions of the Vimana. The Germans were clearly well aware throughout the history of some 12 to 6,000 to 3,000 years, depending upon Oriental and Near Eastern history, that these craft did exist. And thus began in the 30s a very intensive effort to try to look at these exotic systems that could cross, as it were, the space barrier and open the window to contact with other worlds. Is this very unique scenario, the contact with other worlds, that is the most important part of the history of the Third Reich? Or how does this type of experiment arrive on the scene? That is to say, the genetic experiments. How does this type of experiment arrive on the scene? That is to say, the ability to come up so quickly with such a vast category of different space systems of flight and navigation. How does this system of a global science, that is to say, that give German experts the ability to make expeditions to Kashmir and to the South Pole, suddenly appear on the scene? Obviously, there are higher connections.
Many expeditions were mounted before and even during the war. Not just in the Near East, but also as far afield as South America, such as this one led by Edmund Kiss. And in the remotest regions of Asia, under the leadership of the famous Swedish explorer Sven Hedin. It was the search for traces of a higher knowledge.
Da war mein Ziel immer die unbekannten Teile von Asien, wo die Karten das verlockende...
My aim was always those unknown parts of Asia, where the maps bore that enticing word unexplored over the white expanses. Such were the areas of Inner Asia and Tibet that I've always sought out. That is to say, I've always had a feeling and a belief that in the middle of the desert, where there was not a soul to be found, where there were no roads, perhaps there could I discover traces of some ancient civilization.
The Vril Society already had its own audacious plan. They got together around Christmas 1943 for a secret meeting in the German Baltic Sea resort of Kolberg. We don't know exactly what was discussed behind closed doors on that occasion. We do know, however, that one subject was right at the top of the agenda. Operation Aldebaran, on which the mediums Maria and Sigrun divulged new transmedial information. Fragmentary though these transmedial messages are, they nevertheless enable us to form an amazingly clear picture of their meanings. Even maps and landscapes of distant planets have been received by medial communication. The Aldebaran solar system is 68 light-years away from the planet Earth. The magical medial telepathic agencies of the Thule and Vril societies have this to report about it. The sun, Aldebaran, has 2 inhabited planets circling it. The 2 together go to make up the Sumerian Empire. On the 3rd and 4th of January 1944, a meeting is believed to have taken place between Hitler and Himmler. The subject of their discussion, the Vril project, the projection of a huge Vril spaceship through the dimensional channel. In other words, a tunnel that was independent of the speed of light to Aldebaran.
If we look at human history, we see throughout the documents of Sumeria, of Ebla in Syria, even the Old Testament book of Ezekiel, chapter 1, speaks of the wheel within the wheel. So there's very clear evidence of higher and parallel evolution throughout human history. However, it is very clear that the major impact of UFO technology did not occur in 1947 at Roswell, but rather earlier by some 10 to 12 years in the area of Germany. And on the basis of looking at documents and talking with former scientists who worked in Germany during the war, it is clear that many of the officers saw UFOs in the sky over Germany during World War II, and even in the region of Pindemünde, where the first experiments took place, there's clear evidence that there were advanced electronic eyes and ears who were watching very carefully the German scientific developments. Clearly and logically, Germany would be the most unique place for a contact that would be made by higher intelligence, since it was in the leadership of the scientific industry in the 20th century. Clearly, it was the place where some of the best scientific minds were assembled in the world.
Can we really disregard the possibility that there was an alien influence or contact at work at that time? What could this structure, photographed on the Friel testing ground in the autumn of 1943, possibly be? A Friel 7 engine being tested? Possibly. But mightn't it also be a spaceship from Aldebaran?
Now, we know that in the early parts of the war, there were certain factions of the Allied forces that did not believe he had a secret weapon. And it wasn't until the Americans made much emphasis of this that they began to look at it seriously, and indeed did discover that Hitler not only had a secret weapon, he had what we would call today a UFO or spacecraft. He had one already off of the drawing board and flying, and it was capable of 1,200 miles an hour, vertical takeoff, 90-degree changes, and much like a helicopter, and of course was far superior to anything the Allied powers had at that time. Secondly, they knew that he had another craft about to be up and going. It was capable of doing 2,500 miles an hour, which was double the original. And not only did it have the characteristics of the original craft, but it also had a laser weapon aboard it that was capable of penetrating 4 inches of armor. Now, needless to say that that really spooked the Allied forces into making a redemptive attempt against him and bringing him into a state of capitulation.
What then became of all the secret projects carried out during the Third Reich? There are indeed a whole series of explanations. One is that the most important flying saucer was purposely sent to the bottom of Lake Mondsee in Upper Austria. Another is that they were concealed somewhere in South America and in the Antarctic. And not just that. Some people actually maintain that there is a German UFO base in the Antarctic, and that many were brought there disassembled by submarines. The most bizarre theory originates from the Special Department U-13. German UFOs are said to have traveled back in time as a result of entering a strange space-time discontinuity, where they were then received as the white gods of ancient Sumerian and Babylonian legends. Amazing tales. There is, however, something concrete to go on. Why did the Allies under Admiral Byrd mount an invasion of the Antarctic?
I would like to say that among the many scenarios, of course, was the reality that there were some 30 missing German submarines that came from Baltic port areas at the close of World War II. These submarine systems had the the Walter snorkel system, which allowed them to stay under water for weeks at a time. And this advanced technology made the German U-boats some of the finest in the world at the time, as acknowledged by U.S. naval documents. It is conceivable that some of this advanced technology could have been put on the submarines, spirited out, and with the snorkel system could have made for Argentinian ports and even the facilities there in Queen Mahnland or Neues Schwabenland. I say this as a strong possibility, having seen the film that was made in 1947 with Admiral Byrd and Admiral Wood. I had the opportunity to actually see portions of this film, and what struck me was the fact that there was a significant military contingent that went down to Antarctica with Admiral Byrd. Why was it necessary to bring some 4,000 soldiers, a battleship, an aircraft carrier, and a support team to go into an area that was purely geological / geophysical exploration? Clearly there were other unknown factors there, and it was up to the Americans to see if they could acquire this missing technology. That is one scenario.
After a few days, however, and the loss of an undisclosed number of aircraft, the operation was abruptly terminated. What happened? What mysterious opponent could have repelled the Allied invasion so quickly and decisively? Could it have been the few remaining members of the German armed forces? Or perhaps even aliens from Aldebaran? Admiral Byrd later explained to the press that in the event of another war, the hard facts were that we would have to reckon with an attack from aircraft that could fly from pole to pole.
Later reports indicated that Admiral Byrd was given 8 months and unlimited funding to go in and pull this thing successfully off. But we also know that within 8 weeks he was totally defeated. Now, the supposition at that point was that there was an advanced civilization and technology, most probably alien. There were with the Third Reich and the SS who was in Antarctica, and that those great and developed technologies were used to defeat Admiral Byrd.
Throughout the world, in the ancient manuscripts of lost civilizations, we are confronted over and over again with tales of space-traveling gods who visited our planet to prepare mankind for a new age of knowledge and wisdom that would come about as a consequence of the next evolutionary step. The occult secret societies of the Third Reich knew of these traditions and sought ways to make contact with these space-traveling gods who had first arrived in Babylon all those centuries ago.
This program has been produced from photographic material made available to us by the THG branch of the Knights Templar, the oldest order of chivalry. We are grateful to the order for trusting us with some of the most closely guarded secrets of all time. Millions of people have seen unidentified flying objects, UFOs or flying saucers. Many of these strange objects have been seen to be operated by human-like creatures. It is far too frightening for most of us to consider what these objects may be, where they come from, and who's sending them. But in this program we will examine the evidence in the form of photos, diagrams and plans which link the enormous number of sightings during and after World War II with research, construction and test flight of a great number of electromagnetically driven craft. Some of these graphics are artists' impressions, but nearly all of what follows has been given to us as genuine material, which has been successfully kept secret for half a century. These photographs were taken by an eyewitness who describes a saucer-shaped craft flying a little faster than a jet airplane, flying very low, emitting a faint singing noise. These photos were taken as it flew above him. The sighting was in Germany.
Just in time I take photos as it flies above me. It has 3 round technical devices underneath, and in the middle a deep blue point with the white emblem of the German Nazi Party. The UFO is quite large. It is light blue in color, and it frightens me. It looks very strange, and it flies very quietly away from me. Behind the wall, another UFO is parked in the dark, but I can see all the different parts quite clearly. Again, there are 3 technical devices underneath, and there are also some sort of wheels which were put underneath to make it movable. It looks like a big axle with big wheels. A truck is there, and a crane in the background. There are only 2 people visible, one underneath the spaceship and the other one on the roof, where there is a small cockpit. Everything is very quiet. There's a cross painted on the spaceship that looks similar to the German Nazi flag. There are no glass windows visible, but there are 2 round openings with something above them. Underneath the UFO there are strange-looking plates which look like rotors of a turbine engine, but they are probably something different. There are protruding parts underneath that look like guns. They could not possibly be antennas because they are too thick. The ship has a diameter of 18 to 20 meters. It looks really dangerous. Next to the truck there's another car parked. It's a VW. Everyone laughed when I told them the story of what I saw. They say I was drunk. I might have been drunk too much beer. But I'm convinced I saw a UFO.
In the week following this UFO report, there were other reports also from Bavaria. For example, a petrol Bowser attendant who said he'd seen a UFO, but people accused him of being drunk and made fun of him. So to avoid further ridicule, he said he was just making a joke. UFO reports are difficult to believe. It's up to each person to form their own opinion and to consider the implications for themselves. On the 14th of December 1944, the New York Times published the first of the UFO news stories. Floating mystery ball is new Nazi air weapon. It was disclosed on December the 13th by the Supreme Headquarters of the Allied Expeditionary Force that a new German weapon made its appearance on the Western Air Front. American airmen report that they are encountering silver-coloured spheres in the air above German territory. The spheres are being encountered singly and in clusters. Sometimes they are semi-translucent. This report is suggestive of electromagnetically driven craft. These objects frequently appeared where German troops were concentrated in Northern Europe. Many ghost rockets were sighted, especially in Scandinavia and Norway. On the screen now is a drawing from the SS files dated 7th of November 1943. The existence of UFOs, which almost all serious researchers now regard as a fact, give us a clue about a whole new technology. The enormous sparks we call lightning give us a glimpse at the immense energy freely available to power these machines. The life energy inside every human being is another aspect of this same magical power. These things are spoken of in the German Tuller Society and through one of its members in the SS. These concepts were quite different to those of the German military at the time. This was the beginnings of the first so-called Green Party, and perhaps ironically a search for a new harmony between man and nature. In the German Tuller Society, the secret sign was the black sun. This same sign was evident in ancient Babylon and to the Carthaginians and the Phoenicians. In these ancient times, the sign of the black sun was symbolized by a cross. The cross recurs throughout history as a symbol of power. This symbol can be seen in the swastika of the Third Reich. The cross is seen on this Messerschmitt. The Knight's Cross is a variation of this symbol, which is thousands of years old. We do not know where the Germans of the Third Reich got their ideas. This drawing of ancient Babylon displays the concept of an invincible power from the heavens. Victor Schauberger was one of the leading scientists in a very intense push for a new and clean energy. Simplified, it could be called implosion instead of explosion. There was a group within the Third Reich who were searching for constructive solutions, not destructive ones. In these diagrams you can see a new type of vehicle was being planned. The normal combustion engines using fossil fuels in our cars are dependent on the explosion principle and hence tend to be destructive to the environment. Victor Schauberger's experimental vehicles were based on esoteric principles and focused his research on electrogravitation. In other words, regarding gravity as an electrical force which can be utilized for propulsion. The U-13 Department of the SS concentrated their efforts on this technique. This was the means by which the Hanibu flying saucer was powered. Here you can see the construction plans of the Hanibu 2. The computer graphic enhancement shows something of the look of these Hanibu flying saucers. The engine is very likely to have been designed by Captain Hans Kohler and built by the German AEG company in 1944. The engine being called the Kohler converter. This engine was designed so that it needed a relatively small amount of energy to activate it. This energy coming from an accumulator or battery. After a short time, the Kohler converter built up sufficient energy transformed from the gravitational field of the Earth This is a diagram of the Kohler converter, and this is a photograph of the actual converter, operating on a principle of genius simplicity. This is a preliminary sketch of the Hanibu 2. The cockpit here is outlined in red. With a circular driving unit beneath, outlined in purple. With adjacent space for people or soldiers. This machine was built somewhat like a modern ship, designed to be self-sufficient for long periods of time, with sleeping space and working area. Looking a bit like the brim of a hat, the saucer part of this machine is the means by which it is steered. This being achieved by emitting an electrically generated force in the chosen direction. There were a number of other spherical and saucer-shaped prototypes also built at this time, but using conventional rocket power. Under the code V7, a number of military prototypes were developed. These were concurrent with the V1 and V2 rocket developments. The Schreiber-Habimol flying machine was a jet-propelled vertical takeoff and landing craft developed in 1942. The first 3 prototypes were badly damaged when tested, and the project was abandoned. Dr. Richard Miti, in cooperation with the Italian researcher Dr. Giuseppe Belluzza, also worked on a flying machine which was round in shape, and developed a new V7 prototype. Here are 2 photographs of the V7, Hitler's new wonder weapon. On the 7th of April 1944, Miti showed construction plans to Hitler and demonstrated the vehicle in flight. In this photograph, Hitler is standing next to a model of the new prototype. This V7 saucer was built with 12 BMW engines of the type 028. The V7 rose to 20,000 metres on the first test and 24,000 metres on the second test. Helium was the fuel used in this machine. Here is a plan of the V7. After this, a new, smaller type called Vril was developed. Here you can see a sketch of the Vril, and here's a photograph of the test flight. Work on these unconventional flying machines was a race with time, since conventional rockets were also being developed, and it was a matter of competing for resources, materials and manpower to build them. These are some of the rockets being developed at this time. Every nation involved in the Second World War were developing new weapons, but the real wonder weapons were not associated with fire and noise, but were being developed and propelled quietly and secretly. An intermediate step was Project Fireball. The Allied forces called them Foo Fighters. The fireballs were developed in Vienna Neustadt, a small town near Vienna, under the technical group of the SS. Here is a photograph of the fireballs in flight. These were radio controlled with no people on board. They were also called flying turtles, and due to certain new fuel combinations, they emitted a strong light. Developed to disrupt the ignition systems of enemy aircraft. This fits in with numerous reports of power failures associated with UFO sightings, including the New York blackout of the 60s. Next we have a drawing indicating the relationship between the Earth's magnetic force, seen here with the North and South Pole, and the electromagnetic field around the flying saucer. This is a list of 261 flying saucers, including 3 Honeyboo models and 84 Vrills. These were built towards the end of World War II. As well as this, there was some Meterphile 7. The Honeyboo had a diameter of 25 meters. The development and construction of these flying machines created the most top-secret documents and the most top-secret projects of the Second World War. The engine of the Honeyboo was the Kohler Tachionata electrogravitation motor in combination with a Wundergraf belt generator. Most of the photographs are of the Honeyboo 2. Here we see the rooms inside the Honeyboo. From these drawings we can imagine what it would have looked like inside a German flying saucer. The red markers here are indicating guns on this saucer. These are photographs of the Honeyboo 2, probably taken during a test flight. We can see a gun on the bottom of this Honeyboo, and what may be a symbol of the Third Reich. What a terrifying impact this must have made on people seeing the craft at a low altitude. This is a tank gun on the bottom of a Honeyboo. Here again are construction plans from the Honeyboo series, indicating that this mystery was once a reality. This gives weight to the suggestion that international oil companies, who control the majority of world commerce, may have something to gain by the continuing suppression of the technology which keeps these massive machines silently in the air. One explanation for the emission of light commonly associated with the night sightings of UFOs is that one method of propulsion is an intense cathode ray emission, creating a vacuum into which the craft moves. This form of propulsion is compatible with the misty impressions of this photograph. The gun is clearly visible under this craft. These photographs show the Honeyboo 2 experimental craft fitted underneath with tank guns developed for the Sherman Panzer or Panther tanks. Although originally these craft were designed to carry electronic guns, they were later fitted with 7.5cm tank cannons. The weight of the cannon would not have been a problem on the Honeyboo craft, which weighed almost 100 tons anyway, because the tachyon and electrogravitation engine generated its own gravitational field. Plans have been discovered for much larger craft. This Honeyboo 4 had several guns. There is also evidence of small, highly manoeuvrable craft. There were 17 vril of 11.5 metres with a speed of 2,900 kilometres per hour with remote control gun. On this vril 9 plan we can see the cockpit of this one-man craft. These are low-altitude test flight photos. On this enlargement we can see the pilot in the cockpit. UFO information is also available from the Huygens Society. Next, our translator comments on some newspaper clippings.
Here's an interesting press release. The first UFO flies in Prague. Flying saucers invented in Germany. Reconstructed flying saucers. The questions if planet Earth is under the control of the UFOs is an interesting one. Is there a danger from an invasion from space? Above the river Elbe there was seen a mysterious flying saucer. There was a hunt for UFOs in Canada too. The American President Jimmy Carter has seen a UFO too. All over the world there has been sightings of UFOs and mysterious flying objects. Mysterious UFO turns alarm at the NATO. Secret UFOs above Hessen. The interests of UFOs is Soviets' aim too. Edwin Aldrin, the second man on the moon, saw 7 UFOs and he was not allowed to talk about it. UFOs at night above Hamburg. 2 policemen saw it too. 100 Germans saw a blue UFO. The watch stopped. UFO above Soviet Union. Nuremberg, pilot hunts UFO. US secret documents prove UFOs caused atom weapons to be useless. Space pieces, a newspaper headline. The mystery of UFOs are solved. UFOs do not come from outer space, but are Nazis who want to create a new Reich. Governments of the world are informed but afraid. If there is a serious economic crisis, they are afraid the Nazis will come with their flying saucers.
It is not only flying saucers that have been seen, but also flying cigars. Huge spaceships shaped like a cigar. These could be the motherships. The idea of a mothership was developed in Germany in 1944, or possibly earlier. This project was called Andromeda. They were 109 meters long, powered by 4 Tula engines. They were designed to carry 1 Hanibu and a few vril. This is an example of a construction plan, very rarely seen. This photograph of the mothership with UFOs emerging is from George Adamski. George Adamski also saw a Hanibu-type spacecraft. He claimed they came from Venus. For comparison, here is a computer-generated replica of the Hanibu 2. This is a CIA paper from 1952 requiring all UFOs to be reported to the military. The CIA recommend to security advisors what information may go to the press in order to avoid panic. Almost all photographs from then on have been censored. About that time, a movie called Earth vs. Flying Saucers was released. but very soon disappeared. This had extraordinary special effects and has only recently turned up in local video stores. This German news clip is a report that an American farmer who witnessed the landing of a flying saucer claimed that the occupants spoke German. The farmer was arrested. The strange markings on this spacecraft show drawings similar to the swastika. Adamski had a friend who also saw flying saucers landing. He was a relative of Winston Churchill. His name was Desmond Leslie. Adamski and Leslie were not arrested. From then on, saucers looking like a Hane-Bootoo were thought to come from Venus. The origin of the many types of UFOs seen in almost every country on the planet remains a question. It is interesting to note the very great interest shown by the German military before and during the war in the Antarctic continent at the South Pole. In 1938, as Germany was strongly preparing for war, Captain Richter led an Antarctic expedition. He was sent there by Hermann Goering. This top-secret expedition was directed to ice-free parts of the Antarctic. The German part of Antarctica was called Neuschwabenland. These positions are where German flags were erected. This is a document of gratitude signed by Hermann Goering. At the height of the Second World War, Admiral Dönitz, the submarine warfare expert, made a very secret mission to move the so-called Last Battalion. This is a list of nearly 100 U-boats which remain unaccounted for. From the serial numbers in the left-hand column we can see that this is not a random list but a complete series of U-boats which have disappeared. There is evidence of a number of secret bases in the Antarctic. This is a statue of Marduk. More of him later. Admiral Karl Dönitz and a president of the Third Reich signed the surrender documents which ended World War II in May 1945. But they never surrendered the Third Reich itself. So officially Germany never surrendered. And this raises the possibility that there may still be German forces in the Antarctic. At the beginning of the war in 1939, Hitler said that if Germany was overrun, the fight would continue from outside. Perhaps we need not place any special significance to this remark. During 1952 in Washington there was panic. You can see from these photographs of a radar screen UFOs flying in formation. They went straight over the White House. A number of radar surveillance centres had the same alarming images on their screens. This was July 1952. Some years prior to that, in 1946 and 1947, Admiral Byrd undertook a US Navy invasion of Antarctica disguised as a scientific expedition. It had the code name High Jump. After preparations in the previous year, Operation High Jump started on the 30th of February 1947. And yet on the 4th of March, after the disappearance of several aircraft, the expedition was cancelled. Although the details have never been published, Admiral Byrd said that objects were able to fly from one pole to the other, and it was necessary to defend ourselves against flying machines from the Antarctic. This is a sketch from the German magazine Spiegel indicating the flying patterns of UFOs. A New Zealand airline pilot, Bruce Cathy, observed similar patterns over New Zealand. In 1958, the Americans sent a major expedition to the Antarctic, during which on the 27th of August, the 30th of August and the 9th of September, there is evidence that nuclear missiles were fired at Neuswadenland, the German territory. This could be linked to the holes in the ozone layer in the Antarctic today. There are parts of a report of a kamikaze operation being a joint German-Japanese expedition in a Hanibu 3 to the planet Mars. A Hanibu 3 with a diameter of 71 metres is claimed to have enough power to travel the 75 million kilometres the distance from Earth to Mars. There is a 1945 report that the SS Department D4 decided to make this journey. This would have been a one-way trip, unless they received help along the way or at the other end of the journey. In this latter part of the war, the level of desperation was sufficient to try anything that could change the fate of Germany. The Hanibu 3 was supposed to reach Mars in 8.5 months, in January 1946. The Hanibu 3 was the only craft which had the speed to reach Mars, and yet if it did arrive, there's no evidence of a friendly welcome. These photographs of the surface of Mars show the bleak landscape that would have greeted these space travellers. Many researchers, seeing this huge carved face on Mars, wonder if it might have been carved long ago as a deliberately grim reminder left by a civilization destroying itself with war and greed, or nuclear holocaust, perhaps millions of years ago. There's an old Egyptian legend of the god Marduk being sad about his home country, Mars. There are photographs of pyramids on Mars and of a ruined city the size of Los Angeles, complete with an underground grid system still emitting infrared or heat radiation. We can only speculate on these things, but it is remarkable that with satellites able to read a newspaper on Earth from various vantage points orbiting around the planet, and with almost every astronaut coming back with stories of seeing flying saucers in space or being greeted by 100 spacecraft on what is supposed to be the first landing on Moon, that no believable explanation has been offered regarding the vast number of sightings by people of all ages and professions. There are 1 million in the USA alone, where military personnel are trained to debunk sightings, and NASA curiously publishes photographs showing UFOs, such as this one. Whilst it makes little sense for armament manufacturers to create hundreds of thousands of nuclear bombs, enough to extinguish all life on this planet many, many times, there is likely to be more to this puzzle. And it may be one of the many vitally important realities which are kept secret by the powerful few. These are official NASA photographs. Exactly what is pictured remains uncertain. It is, however, worth mentioning a report in the highly regarded Australian magazine Nexus that a Russian spacecraft photographing Mars ceased transmission in the presence of a huge UFO. Perhaps the Americans and Russians are preparing their Star Wars capabilities for an invader from another planet. Or perhaps we are being used as a manufacturing base for deadly toys to be delivered to some distant intergalactic war game. Every ancient civilization has stories of space travelers in fiery chariots from the sky. These pictures show the legend of Marduk. Legends of Marduk and other space gods from the past usually include predictions that they will return. We are still left to guess whether the UFOs seen so often are evidence of visitors from outer space or examples of advanced anti-gravity craft made secretly on Earth in great numbers. Whatever the truth of these things is, it may be time to find a new system of planetary management, where love is the currency and money and time are only rated brief mentions in history books.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Cosmic Egg. And as you know, this show is not timid about bringing on controversial issues. This week we have rather interesting information to share with you and a very, very controversial figure. His name is Vladimir Tesiski, and he is here joining us to impart on us an awful lot of information. So Vladimir, welcome, and I'm very glad that you managed to make it.
Thank you very much for your invitation.
Now, Vladimir, I've looked at your credits and I'm terribly impressed. In fact, looking at what you've done in terms of education, I'm really surprised. Here you have a Bachelor of Science in Physics, you have a Master of Science in Electronics, and the list goes on and on and on and on and on. You have brought on to me an awful lot of information about about Nazi Germany and the technology that they had in the 40s. Now, I am absolutely astounded by the information that you have to share with us. You have brought on pictures. Could you please tell us about these pictures and what they actually are telling us?
Well, in one sentence, while researching UFOs in general and the terrestrial component of the alien presence in particular, namely secret terrestrial programs that have been dealing with anti-gravity and secret space programs for the last almost 100 years, I realized that a lot of these secret projects are covered up behind the alien smokescreen, and later on laundered to the general public as an alien technology gift to us. And in order to pull the carpet from under the feet of the government, or let's call it the party line American ufology, I've been doing research on Nazi UFOs, on the 50 or more basically different models of craft that the Germans built before and during the Second World War, powered by every engine that was in production in Germany at that time, by piston engines, Wankel engines, turbojet engines, ramjet, pulse jets, rocket engines, and the final and most advanced models were powered by electromagnetogravitic drives. These are the most, basically no moving part drives. But in order to convince someone that this massive research and development conspiracy, let's call it, and this secret space program run by the Germans has been on for all these years. Actually, the persistent rumors are that the Germans landed on the moon and Mars before the war ended. And later they were followed by many other secret programs, but we will talk about that probably in a future show. The Russians and the Americans landed on the moon and Mars in the late 40s and early 50s respectively. An Italian team landed on Mars in 56. Many superpowers have been actively pursuing secret space programs based on anti-gravity propulsion. But in order to convince someone of the existence of this massive research and development conspiracy, one first has to be convinced of the existence of political and economic conspiracies in this world. Here I have a few little books that are probably the best introduction into the field of economic conspiracies. None there called Conspiracy and the Fourth Reich of the Rich by Des Griffin. One of the best books on the New World Order conspiracies and secret government projects is Bill Cooper's book, Behold a Pale Horse. There isn't much time for further political conspiratorial introduction, but behind the political conspiracies are the scientific conspiracies, or the secret sciences of the hermetic societies and brotherhoods that for thousands of years have been practicing endeavors that are considered science fiction by the general public. This is a book about flying devices built in India 4, 5, 6,000 years ago. In my research, bibliographic research, I have a vast collection of several hundred books on this topic, and these are some of the most interesting ones relating particularly to German secret weapons.
Okay, so in this book that you just brought on, you talk about Germany already. Does this actually mention that Germany, before the Second World War, being involved in very, very advanced technology?
Yes, actually these books mention a lot of extremely bizarre, almost science fiction military technologies. And the first book that mentions particularly the first several models of flying saucers that were built in Germany is the book Intercept UFO, or Intercept But Don't Shoot by Renato Vesco.
Now, Renato Vesco, was he part of the Mussolini government?
Renato Vesco was actually a very leading figure in the Italian research and development effort. He was the research and development boss of the Italian Air Force. He may not have been a Werner von Braun, but he definitely was an extremely brilliant scientist and engineer. And besides that, Italians and Japanese were regularly briefed on all secret German developments during the war. So after the war, when he wrote the book, he knew exactly what he was writing about. Actually, he wrote and discussed in great detail the first several models of flying saucers that were built in Germany. This is the turbojet-powered flying saucer built by Schriever, diameter of about 30 feet. And the joint project, this was the first operational interceptor fighter saucer that was built by Bellonzo, Miete, and Schriever. A very interesting fictional history of the German flying saucer effort are these two books by Harbinson, Inception and Genesis, written as documental fiction, but in my opinion they just show the basically the very first level of this tremendous research pyramid that happened in Germany. I have some photographs that were extremely rare to find. Many of these were pulled out of German libraries by our research associates and friends. Most of them are impossible to find in the United States. The third model that we talked about is a very interesting photograph done in 1952 over Mount Rainier in Washington State. And in my opinion, this is a flying Kugelblitz, or ball lightning, automatic anti-aircraft weapons platform that was captured by the Americans and test flown secretly from bases in the western United States and northwestern Canada. Later on, through German sources, we have discovered not only turbojet-powered craft, but these are rocket-powered craft with rocket engines of the V2 type. And the subsequent model of Miete, these two craft had an exoatmospheric capability and they could easily go in orbit around the Earth. This is a very interesting drawing of a saucer-type dreadnought, a 60-yard diameter, this is about 200 feet diameter, interplanetary craft that has huge sleeping compartments. It is basically 10 stories tall. Drawings were published in Germany by a little secret society there.
What would have been the purpose of that Schriever flying disc here?
It had definitely an interplanetary objective, because a flying saucer that can circle the Earth in 1.5 hours does not need sleeping compartments. You don't have to sleep between during your flight. Basically, the longest distance you can travel around the planet is 1-2 hours at the most.
Right.
So obviously sleeping compartments on such a massive scale would be needed only for a craft that would land on the moon, that would stay there for a long time and come back.
So you're actually saying that the Germans pre-World War II were refining the technology in order to actually travel to a different planet?
Exactly. These two models are capable of going in orbit around the Earth and probably going in an extended elliptical orbit toward the moon. This huge craft is capable of getting into orbit around the moon and landing on the planet. And these were actually the most primitive of the models that the Germans built. 2 months ago, I received, through some private channels, a secret documentary film made by the German secret society, the Thule-Gesellschaft, something like an equivalent of the Illuminati society here. The title of this documentary, 2-hour documentary film, is UFOs, the Third Reich Strikes Back. This is the emblem of this secret society. They were basically the ideologues of the Third Reich. Talking too much about Germany, I would not like the discussion to be considered as an apology of the German success. What the Germans did to millions of hapless victims in World War II, I mean, they earned enough karma from themselves to last them for this and many subsequent lifetimes to come, for these of us that believe in karma. But once these things invented, they were shared later by the superpowers. They cannot be disinvented, to use Daniel Bell's interesting
One thought
expression.
keeps coming back to me, and that is almost world supremacy. I'm looking at this and I'm going, what's the incentive? What's the reasoning behind trying to refine such technology?
Well, it gives man an ability to go to the moon, to explore the planets of the solar system, to go beyond the solar system. Some of these larger crafts were definitely able to go beyond the solar system, as we shall see very soon. The first row of photographs, actually this is a very small part, this is maybe a third of all the documentary photographs shown in the German documentary video. These are interceptor fighter craft of the Vril series that have never been written about in any other source in the world literature so far. They were about 30 feet in diameter and extremely maneuverable. Their speed was almost 3 times the speed of sound. For them, Allied bombers and fighters were basically sitting ducks. Renato Vesco, in his book, depicts about 3 dozen attacks of flying saucers on Allied bomber formations with devastating consequences, and these all were attacks of the previous and more primitive craft. These craft were developed in the very last years of the war, 44, 45. This subsequent line here are the 25-meter diameter, which is about 75-meter diameter, 30 feet tall tank killers, the craft of the Honeybull type. We have never seen before UFOs with tank turrets attached underneath.
Oh yeah.
We see different models of tank turrets. Actually, these are standard issue turrets for the German Panther tank and the Panzervier tank. Later models developed in the 60s from the German colony on the South Pole, which is another very controversial issue. Admiral Byrd led an expedition to the South Pole in '47, trying to wipe out the Germans, but he was beaten very badly. In just 2.5 weeks he had to leave the continent because the Germans had perfected all these craft. On the bottom row we have the most interesting examples here. This is an original drawing of a cigar-shaped mothership of 330 feet length that was carrying inside itself one of the tank killer craft and 3 of the interceptor fighter saucers.
So how big was this cigar-shaped
It
craft?
was about 90 to 100 feet in diameter and 330, 350 feet length. This is a football field size craft. The most interesting, and this could be photographs of German crafts in flight well after the end of the World War, probably flown from their base on the South Pole.
In what year was that, approximately?
These photographs were taken 42, these are and 43, these are 44 and 45. These were taken after the war. The drawings date from 1943. The biggest craft that the Germans built was the 74-meter diameter. This is about 220 feet diameter flying saucer of the Honeybu 3 type. This is a naval warfare craft with, we can see here in these turrets, triple guns of a naval caliber, 3 turrets on the underbelly and a 4th turret on the top. This was a craft made for huge naval warfare. According to this film, the only craft was taken and flown from the Earth to Mars by a huge crew of basically volunteers and self-sacrificial crew of Germans and Japanese. And it landed on January 15, 1946. After 8 months of flight, they departed April 45, a month before the war ended in Germany. And they crash landed on Mars. The gravity field there is too weak, so the craft couldn't make it real nice in the landing. The most interesting things about this craft are that these are free energy devices. These are basically flying converters of gravitational energy that convert the energy of the geomagnetic field of Earth into the electromagnetic energy of flight. So these craft never had to tank. They never had to replenish their reservoirs. They had actually tapped into the inexhaustible reservoir of free gravitational energy of the planet. This is something even more taboo as a topic than the fact that the Germans developed all these 50 different models of craft. Because if one is able to go basically for free to the moon and Mars without using a single gram of fuel, free riding on the gravitational currents of our solar system, then a lot of our present-day economy about, well, we all have to pay for the fuel when we tank our cars, becomes obsolete.
So let's discuss this in much more depth. In your estimation, where is all this technology stored?
Well, Germans were not the first one to develop this technology. John Keely presented his anti-gravity flying bathtub, as if we may call it like this, a funny-looking contraption. He sat on it, rose noiselessly, accelerated to a very fast speed, and came back and landed in front of the stunned eyes of the War Ministry here in the United States in the 1860s. They said, well, we can't find any possible use of this device.
Where was Nazi Germany? I mean, when did Nazi Germany actually come into play?
There are persistent rumors that the Germans were contacted by one extraterrestrial race, as have been all governments of all superpowers all throughout the terrestrial history. But that particular race was the cause of this tremendous explosion, this cornucopia of German killing machines and advanced weapons technologies that had absolutely no precursor whatsoever in previous terrestrial developments. So basically from the 20s and 30s, Germany was actively pursuing research in rocket propulsion, in anti-gravity propulsion, in free energy devices that were later combined with their flying saucers to make these formidable weapons. Later on, this technology was used by the secret powers, by Russians, by the superpowers, namely the Russians, the British, the Americans, the French. Even the rumors are that the Israelis and the Brazilians have their own anti-gravity craft in operation these days.
I have a question that's burning me. That question is, why didn't the Germans at the time when they were actually losing the war, why did they not actually throw all the technology that they had, such as this, and just as much as possible obliterate the enemy?
Oh, well, actually, we are getting here very deep into the political and banking conspiracies behind these wars. A war is not meant to obliterate the enemy, the government, by forcing it to buy more armaments. If you obliterate the enemy, there wouldn't be any future enemy for the future war that is coming. Okay. So basically, all these wars have been orchestrated and choreographed by the same world banking elite that has been funding both sides in a conflict.
But in what way would that benefit Nazi Germany?
Well, actually, from the mid-30s, the Germans were actively involved in their South Polar research. From the late 30s, they started building their underground bases on the South Pole, and by 45, they have moved, according to some rumors, from a few 100,000 to up to 1 million of slave labor and Nazi scientists and SS officers down there in this huge underground colony that later on engaged in space exploration and genetic research. According to persistent rumors, basically all the genetic research going on in the underground labs these days in the United States has been started in Nazi Germany. I know a very good movie producer who was working on one UFO documentary, and he saw in a military base here in the United States a documentary film, 30-minute film about genetic research on humans, crossbreedings between humans and animals in Nazi Germany 50 years ago in the concentration camps. So the South Polar colony had primarily its goals in space exploration and genetic research. So basically the Germans were saving all these devices for the defense of the South Polar colony, which Admiral Byrd learned unexpectedly that they had made an impenetrable fortress there.
So why did we not find out about what happened to Admiral Byrd?
Well, there's an interesting interview in an Argentinian paper. He probably gave that on his way back from the South Pole before the security lid was clamped on him, where he said the next world war will be fought with an extremely powerful adversary that has the ability to fly from pole to pole. He was obviously talking about the German craft that obliterated his aviation. All his planes were shot down in less than 3 weeks. He came down with 3 carrier fleets with 3 formations of carriers and support craft and 4,000 troops, and was beaten in less than 3 weeks and hastily retreated from
After the Second World War, Nazi Germany, obviously, after its defeat, was there a tacit agreement that they could keep that technology and refine it further? I'm surprised that...
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we have to keep in mind that the Rothschilds and all the other European bankers have been financing for 300 years both sides in every conflict. And this is the best way for them to have the government load their credit cards, and so then to live off these enormous interest on these loans. During the Second World War, Nazi Germany was financed by basically the Wall Street and the American banking community and the European banking community, as was the Russian Bolshevik Revolution.
Are you saying that German bankers, namely some of the big families, were behind the revolution in Russia?
Well, the Russian Revolution was financed by Wall Street, by the Vatican, and by South African gold. It was financed, it was planned, financed, paid for, carried, and later on Wall Street helped Russia in the first 20 years of the most difficult 20s, basically in the 20s and 30s, by propping up the Russian economy. So what happened to the German South Polar Colony? I think that Admiral Byrd probably concluded the first tacit agreement or condominium agreement between the Americans and the Germans, namely that let's not interfere into each other's affairs. Maybe even we would do some trading. We would be trading with crude materials, raw materials, bolts, nuts, metal profiles, raw materials, and you would be giving us some of your astonishing technology. This is according to Renato Vesco in his book Intercept But Don't Shoot, and according to the book of Genesis.
These are fictionalized.
The second, yes, but this is a documentary, highly engineering, highly specialized report on the German anti-gravity research and development. I have a lot of information about secret collusion between the United States and Russia, all behind the smoke screen of the Cold War.
But Germany, what's Germany's involvement in the Cold War?
Official West Germany, very little. Basically, they were the strongest member of NATO. But the secret German colony on the South Pole was basically working hand in hand with the secret Soviet-American space program. It is rumored that when the Russians and Americans landed on a joint flight to the moon with a probably American-made saucer in the late 40s, not only that they discovered the German swastika flags already planted in the most famous craters on the moon, but they spent a few days as guests to the German ex-Nazi moon base.
Yeah. So you have so much information, it's staggering. In fact, I'm absolutely overwhelmed by all the information that you've managed to share with us in such short time. And I would like to be able to invite you for further shows where we can go much deeper into how all this Nazi German involvement came about and where it's really taking us to ultimately.
Actually, I have several videos that I've been selling for the last 1 year. Any one of the viewers that are interested in obtaining more detailed information and lengthy bibliographies, I have a bibliography that runs into the hundreds of volumes.
We will have
detailed bibliography. From that phone number at the end of the show, they can order some of these videos. I'll be making some new ones. Basically, it's a very interesting collection of documentary films and materials.
Wonderful. Well, I'm really glad that you actually came today to share all this information with us, and I hope that we will go much deeper next time into all of this
Next time I would like to talk about the secret Russian-American space programs, the landing on the moon in the late 40s, the landing on Mars in the early 50s. I even think that I have a documentary footage of the first joint landing on Mars. The film says that it was made in '62. I have a suspicion that it was way back in '52. A saucer landing by the two superpowers.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining us on the Cosmic Egg. And please write in, send us your comments, give us your suggestions, and thank you again for joining us on this show. Bye-bye.